You ever sit across from someone and just know, somehow, that you're looking at a person who has killed people? Not in a scary way, not even in an obvious way. It's quieter than that. It's in the way they hold a coffee cup, the way their eyes find every exit in a room without seeming to look, the way they laugh half a second after everyone else, like they had to remember how. That's how I felt the first time I sat across from Petty Officer Maren Holloway. She was 26, smaller than I expected, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She ordered black coffee, no sugar, and held it with both hands like she was warming them, even though it was July in San Diego and we were sitting outside. I had been told by 3 different people that this woman had done something in a valley in eastern Afghanistan that none of them could fully explain. They each told the story a little differently. They each ended it the same way. She shouldn't have been there, and we shouldn't be alive. So I drove down from Los Angeles. I bought her a coffee. I asked her to tell me what happened. She looked at me for a long time before she answered. "You sure you want this one?" she said. I told her I did. She took a slow breath, set the coffee down, and then she started talking the way people do when they've told a story to themselves 1,000 times in the dark, but never out loud. The valley didn't have a name on most maps. The locals called it something that translated, roughly, to the throat. Maren said it took her a while to understand why. It was March, cold in a way that gets into the bones and stays there, the kind of cold that makes your fingers stupid. She remembered that part. She kept rubbing her thumb against her index finger while she talked, like she was still trying to get the feeling back. The team was an 8-man SEAL element. Maren wasn't one of them. She was attached as a precision marksman, on loan from a unit she wouldn't name, for a job nobody fully briefed her on until the bird was already in the air. "They didn't want me there," she said. "I could feel it before we even landed. You can always feel it." The team leader was a guy named Brennan. Big shoulders, beard down to his chest, eyes like he'd already lived 3 lives. He shook her hand on the tarmac and didn't say anything. Just looked at her, nodded once and walked off. The second in command, a guy they called Pike, was less polite. "You ever shot at a man before, ma'am?" That's what he asked her, right in front of everyone while they were loading magazines. She said yes. He laughed, not a mean laugh, a tired one. "We'll see," he said. She told me she didn't take it personally. She said you can't in that job. People react to you the way they react to you, and you do your work, and the work either speaks or it doesn't. I asked her if she was scared. She thought about it. "I was nervous about the cold," she said. "Cold messes with your trigger pull. That's what I was thinking about on the helicopter. Not the enemy, not the mission, the cold. That stuck with me." They were dropped about 6 clicks from the target area, in the dark, on a ridgeline that looked, in her words, like God forgot to finish it. Just rocks, sharp ones, stacked at angles that made no sense. They moved on foot for almost 4 hours before they found their first hide. The mission, as much as she'd tell me, was an extraction. A man, an asset who had information that several governments wanted very badly. He was being held in a village at the bottom of the valley. The team's job was to get in, get him, and get out before sunrise the next day. Simple on paper. The problem was the snipers. 3 of them, maybe 4. Nobody was sure. They had been working that valley for almost 2 years, and in that time they had killed, by the most conservative estimate, 31 coalition soldiers. They had killed 2 rangers in October. They had killed a Marine officer in December, through a window, from a distance that nobody could quite verify. They had killed a SEAL named Marcus Reed in January. Marcus Reed had been Brennan's best friend since Bud S. Maren didn't know that until later, but she said when she found out, a lot of things made sense. The snipers had a name in the intel reports, just a designation, but the men on the ground called them something else. They called them ghosts, because nobody had ever seen them, not once, not a muzzle flash, not a silhouette, not a shell casing left behind. The shots came from impossible angles, from positions that, when checked afterward, were always empty. The men would sweep a ridgeline for hours, find nothing, and 3 days later another body would come home. That's what we were walking into, Marin said. 8 men and me to go pick up a guy, in the throat. She took another sip of coffee. And command kept telling us the snipers were a secondary concern. She laughed for the first time since we'd sat down. It wasn't a happy laugh. She set up her first position on the second night just before dawn, a small notch between 2 boulders, about 900 meters up from the village, with a view of the western approach. Brennan had picked it. He'd walked her up there himself in the dark and showed her the sight lines. He didn't say much, she told me. He just pointed here, here, here. Then he looked at me and asked if I could see what he was seeing. She said she could. He nodded and walked back down to the team. She lay in that notch for 19 hours. I asked her what you think about, for 19 hours alone, in a hole in a rock in enemy country. She said you don't think. She said the second you start thinking, you start moving, and the second you start moving, you die. So you just exist, you watch, you breathe, you let your body forget it's a body. It's almost peaceful, she said. If you can get to that place, most people can't. I asked her if she could. She looked at me for a long time again. I learned how to be invisible before I learned how to read, she said. It's not a skill for me, it's just who I am. I didn't ask what she meant by that. I had a feeling I already knew. The first shot came at 4:47 in the afternoon. Pike was the one who got hit. He was 20 meters below Marin's position, moving between 2 pieces of cover, doing exactly what he was supposed to do. The shot caught him in the side, just above his plate carrier, in that little gap of fabric and skin that snipers love. He went down without a sound. Marin said the worst part wasn't the shot. The worst part was the silence after, because nobody on the team knew where it came from. Brennan was on the radio in 2 seconds, voice flat, asking for a direction. Nobody had one. They were that good, Marin said. The shot was already over before any of us heard it. She had her eye to the scope, before Pike's body had even stopped moving. She had been watching the eastern ridgeline for 19 hours. She knew every rock on it, every bush, every shadow. She saw nothing, so she watched the way the shadows moved. That's something she told me that I'll never forget. She said most snipers look for the man. She looks for the change. A bird that flies up when it shouldn't. A patch of grass that bends the wrong way. A shadow that gets a half shade darker for half a second. She watched the ridge for 11 minutes. And then, on a rock face she had checked maybe 200 times that day, she saw a piece of cloth lift, just slightly, in a wind that wasn't blowing. She told me she didn't think about it. Her body moved before her brain did. The crosshair settled, her breath went out halfway, and her finger took up the slack on the trigger the way it had 10,000 times before in training. The rifle bucked. The cloth dropped. A man rolled out from behind the rock and didn't move again. One, she said into her radio, just that, one word. Brennan came back on the line. Confirmed, he said, keep working. I want you to understand something. What Marin did in those next 6 hours has never been written down anywhere. It's not in any official record. The Navy doesn't talk about it. The men who were there don't talk about it. Even now, telling me, she was choosing her words like each one cost her something. She killed the second sniper at 5:34. He had moved, of course he had. The second the first one went down, the others would know they had been spotted. They would change positions. They would go deeper into their hides. They would wait her out. Most shooters in that situation would have done the same, would have gone still, would have waited for the enemy to make a mistake. Maren did the opposite. She moved. She left the notch Brennan had picked for her. She crawled on her stomach for almost 40 minutes, across open rock in daylight, until she found a new position on a ledge that her team didn't even know existed. Why, I asked her, why move? She looked at me like I had asked her why fish swim. Because they were looking for me where I was, she said, not where I wasn't. She sat up on the ledge, she watched a different piece of the ridge, and she waited. The second sniper made a small mistake. He adjusted his rifle just an inch to follow a member of the SEAL team who was moving across the valley floor. The motion was almost nothing, a flicker, a breath of metal in late afternoon sun. She put a round through his scope. That's not a metaphor. She told me, very calmly, that she put the bullet directly through the front lens of his rifle scope and out the back of his skull, because that's where his eye was, and because the scope was the only part of him she could see. The distance, she said, was just over 1,100 meters. I asked her if she felt anything. She thought for a second. I felt my own heartbeat, she said. That's how I knew the shot was good. If your heart speeds up, you missed. If it stays where it is, you didn't. 2, she said into her radio. Brennan didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had changed, just a little. She heard it. Copy 2, he said. Keep working, Holloway. It was the first time he had used her name. The third one was the hardest. She knew there were at least 3. She had seen in the months of intel before the mission the angles of the previous kills, the way the shots had come in. She had built in her head a map of where these men liked to work from. The first 2 had fit the pattern. The third one would be smarter. The third one would know she was hunting him. She lay on that ledge for another 2 hours, doing nothing. The sun started to drop. The shadows got long. The temperature, which had been brutal all day, started to fall fast. She could feel her hands going numb again. She flexed her fingers, slowly, one at a time, the way she had been taught 100 years ago by an old man in a field in Tennessee who had also known how to be invisible. She thought about him for a second while she waited. She told me that. She said she thought about her grandfather and the field, and the way he used to make her sit perfectly still for an entire afternoon while a deer walked past, just to teach her what stillness was. He didn't know he was raising a soldier, she said. He thought he was just raising a quiet little girl. She was still smiling very faintly when she saw the third sniper move. He was 900 meters away, on the opposite ridge, and he was very, very good. He had buried himself, almost literally, into the side of the mountain. He had pulled rocks and dirt over his ghillie suit until he was just another piece of the landscape. The only reason Maren saw him at all was because, for a single second, he turned his head to look at something behind him. The angle of his neck changed the shape of the shadow he was casting. She caught it out of the corner of her scope. He turned around, she told me. I'll never know why. Maybe he heard something, maybe he had a feeling. Snipers get those, we get those a lot. She didn't take the shot right away. She told me this was the part most people don't understand. They think shooting someone from a long distance is about pulling a trigger. It's not. It's about waiting for the exact moment when everything in the universe lines up. The wind, the breath, the earth under your stomach, the heartbeat between your ribs, the mirage off the rocks at the halfway point, the drop of the bullet over 900 meters. You don't pull the trigger. You let the trigger pull itself through you. She waited for almost 4 minutes. The wind shifted twice. Both times she adjusted, almost imperceptibly. Her cheek never left the stock. Her breathing got so slow that, she said, she felt her vision start to go dark at the edges, the way it does right before you faint. Then the wind dropped to 0. It only does that for a second or two in places like that, a pocket of stillness in the chaos. She found her hold. Her finger took up the slack. The round went out. She said you can sometimes, if the conditions are right and the distance is right, see the trace of the bullet through the air. A tiny disturbance, like heat coming off a road. She said she saw it that day. A faint thread of distortion arcing across the valley. It ended at the base of the third sniper's throat. He never knew what hit him. 3, she said into the radio. This time Brennan answered immediately. Tell me you're sure, he said. Tell me you're sure that's all of them. She wasn't sure. She told him that. She told him she thought there might be one more. There was a pause on the radio, a long one. Then Brennan said, find him. The fourth sniper was a problem. Because if he was real, he was the best of the bunch. He had watched 3 of his men die. He had not fired a single shot during the entire engagement. He had not moved. He had not panicked. He had simply waited the way a real predator waits. For his enemy to feel safe. Maren told me she felt him before she saw him. I asked her what that meant. She said when you're a sniper long enough, you start to feel other snipers the way a dog feels another dog in the yard. You can't explain it. You just know. There's a pressure to the air, a density to the silence, something that watches you while you watch. She felt that, lying on the ledge as the sun went down. She also knew she had a problem. It was getting dark. Her scope, good as it was, had limits. The fourth sniper was probably equipped the same way. Whoever moved first, whoever broke first, would die first. She had a choice to make. She could lie there until full dark, retreat to the team, and hope that the fourth man, if he existed, would let them extract the asset without a shot. That was the smart play. That was what the manual would have said. Or she could hunt him. She thought about Pike, lying 20 meters below her old position with a bullet in his ribs, being treated by a SEAL medic named Garcia who was trying not to cry while he worked. She thought about Marcus Reed, who she had never met, but whose photo Brennan had carried in his vest, which she had noticed in the helicopter on the way in. She thought about the 31 other men, faces she would never see, names she would never know, who had died in this valley because 3 or 4 men had decided to make a sport of it. She made her choice. She started to crawl again. Now I want to slow down here, because this part is important. Maren did something on that ridge that the SEAL team did not know she was doing. She did not tell them on the radio. She did not ask permission. She simply went silent, turned off her comms, and disappeared. For almost 2 hours. Brennan tried to raise her 4 times. She didn't answer. He told me, when I spoke to him later, that those 2 hours were the worst of his career. He thought she was dead. He thought the fourth ghost had her. He thought he had brought a woman he didn't know into his valley and gotten her killed, and that he was going to have to write a letter to her mother explaining how, and he didn't even know if she had a mother. What Maren was actually doing was crawling. She crawled almost 2 kilometers in the dark across rock that cut her hands and her knees and her elbows. She circled the entire eastern ridge. She came up on it from the south, from a direction no one was watching, and she found a new hide, a third one, in a fold of rock that she said was barely big enough for her body. She lay there in the cold. She waited. She told me she didn't know if the fourth sniper was real, or where he was, or if he was even on that ridge. She was working on instinct alone. She was working on a feeling, and the feeling told her that if he existed, he would be high, higher than the others, because that's where she would have been. She scanned the upper ridgeline for almost an hour. She saw nothing. The cold got worse. She started to shiver. She told me very quietly that there is a specific kind of fear that comes when your body starts to fail you in a hide, because shivering ruins your shot. Shivering kills you. She put it down. I don't know how to explain what that means. She told me she just put it down, the shivering, the cold, the fear. She set them aside like a coat she didn't need anymore, and her body went still again. That's when she saw him. He was almost 200 meters higher than she had expected. He was inside the rock itself, in a small natural cave, and the only part of him she could see was the very tip of his suppressor, poking out from the shadow of the opening. If she had been anywhere else on that mountain, she wouldn't have seen it. The angle was impossible. But she wasn't anywhere else. She had crawled 2 kilometers to find that exact piece of ground. She didn't take the shot right away. She told me, with a kind of awe that surprised me, that she watched him for almost 20 minutes first. Just watched. Watched the way he breathed, which she could see in the small puffs of vapor that came from the mouth of the cave. Watched the way he moved his rifle, just a centimeter at a time, scanning a section of the valley where Brennan and the team were now moving toward the village. He was very good, she said. I want you to write that down. He was the best shooter I have ever seen before or since. If he had been on our side, he would have been famous. I asked her if she felt anything, watching him. She didn't answer for a long time. Respect, she finally said. That was the only word she used. She made the shot at 9:14 p.m. The distance was 1,304 meters. In the dark, with a wind that was, by then, gusting in 3 different directions at 3 different altitudes between her and the target. I am not a soldier. I don't know how to explain to you, in any way that would do it justice, how hard that shot was. I asked 4 different snipers after I left her what they thought. 3 of them said it wasn't possible. The 4th one said it was possible, but only for maybe 2 or 3 people alive in the world. Maren told me, when I asked her about it, that she didn't think about it as 1 shot. She thought about it as 1,000 shots. Every shot she had ever taken in her life. Every round her grandfather had walked her through, in that field in Tennessee. Every drill, every range day, every cold morning in a hide somewhere far from home. All of them, she said, were practice for that 1 bullet. The trigger broke clean. The round flew for a long time, almost 2 full seconds. She said she could hear in her own head every millisecond of its flight. It entered the mouth of the cave. It found him. He never even raised his head. She didn't say 4 on the radio. She didn't say anything. She just turned her comms back on, and Brennan's voice, frantic, came pouring into her ear. Holloway, 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 respond. Holloway, where are you, Holloway? She let him finish. Then she said very quietly, Valley is clear. You can move the team. There was a long, long silence. Then Brennan said, his voice cracking just slightly, repeat your last. Valley is clear, sir, she said. All 4 are down, you can move the team. Another silence. Then in the background of his radio, she heard Pike, who was still alive, still bleeding, being carried by Garcia toward the extraction point. Pike was laughing. She told me she will never forget the sound of that laugh. It was raw and hoarse and full of pain, and it was also the happiest sound she had ever heard in her life. I told you, Pike was saying over and over. I told you, I told you, I told you. She found out later he wasn't talking to her. He was talking to himself. He had bet a teammate in the helicopter on the way in that Maren would prove him wrong about her. He had bet his coffee rations for a month. He won that bet. He came home and drank that coffee for the next 4 weeks. I want to tell you about the extraction because it matters. The team got to the village at almost 2 in the morning. They found their asset alive in a basement under a building that had once been a school. They got him out. They walked him and Pike and everything they had carried in the 4 kilometers back to the extraction point. Maren came down from her ledge to meet them. She told me Brennan was the first one to see her. He stopped walking. The whole team stopped walking. She was, at this point, covered in dirt and her own blood from the crawl, and her hands were shaking from the cold, and her face was so pale she looked, in her words, like something dragged up out of a grave. Brennan walked over to her. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he took off his own jacket, the one with the patches and the rank and his name on it, and he put it around her shoulders. He said one thing. He said, "Thank you, sister." That was all. The rest of the team, one by one, walked past her on the way to the bird, and every single one of them, including Pike, who was being carried on a stretcher, reached out and touched her shoulder. Not her hand, not her arm. Her shoulder. She told me when she described that part that she couldn't talk for a while. Neither could I.